You talked about, I think previously on one of the last times you're on the podcast, which was like the best thing is good news. The second best thing is bad news now, as opposed to. So yeah, it'd be good if you could. Yeah, there's that quote of like what the culture was like. I think.
There was a great article. I think this guy's gone now. I think he was the chief executive for NEOM, but
he hasn't moved to Bali. Just check that before you before you go dropping this story.
So if you're wondering why I think there was probably a culture where people were scared to give bad news. This is a quote in the second paragraph from the CEO. If you don't tell me who is responsible, I'm going to take a gun from under my desk and shoot you.
Yeah. Welcome back to the Off-Site Podcast. I am Jason Lancini, joined by Sam Hanisch, filling in for Carlos, who is off for a week or so. Sam, welcome aboard in the guest host position, mate. How are you?
Very well. Thanks for having me back. Good to be here in 2025.
Awesome, mate. So we're going to cover three really interesting topics that are all related to news in the week. It's been a jam-packed week of news. First thing off the bat, recent news out of NEOM, which shows that what was 500 billion investment might be 55 trillion or some other equally unimaginable number, and a lot of gossip and stuff behind the scenes about the future of that project, which we'll dive into. Second, we will continuing on this theme of European metro projects, a super interesting project with totally different construction methodologies in the Stockholm Metro Expansion project. And then finally, in big news out of the last week or so, Procore founder and CEO Tui is transitioning out of the CEO role into an executive chairman role, and we'll talk about what does that mean for the future of one of construction technology's biggest players. Before we dive in, mate, how's your week been?
Yeah, good. Equally busy here. I was surprised when looking at the articles. They all literally dropped in the last week. It was really a jam-packed week of news.
Yeah, no scraping the bottom of the barrel. We would never do that, but none of that needed. There are either some other things that came up which we kicked out to the next week. It feels like a month of news in a week kind of thing happening.
Yeah, Olu must be cheering. That was the easiest bit of research you ever had to do.
Don't give away that someone else does the research. How's the weather and temperature in Bali?
It's actually turned back into the rain season, so it's not great. So it's been bucketing all day and night, unfortunately. But I don't think anyone's going to shed a tear for me over in Bali.
No, I don't think so.
I'll leave it there.
I was just trying to get my relative Q score up relative to you by reminding people that you're in Bali.
Have you broken 10 degrees yet in Germany, or is that's not quite?
It's crazy weather. It was there was a period where it was absolutely freezing. It was single digit negatives to maybe 5 degrees or 4 degrees in a day, and then it went to this weird period, went to 2s to 15s for a week, and then back now to 0 to 6 or so. It's horrible. I don't know, global warming, but I'm talking I know what the normal is. I don't know what the normal is. It just struck me as weird.
Yeah.
When I walk out of the house and I'm either way overdressed or way underdressed. I get the pleasure next week. I'm heading to London for a week, so spending time with the team there for a full week, which will be wonderful. So why don't we dive into topic number one? I know you're particularly interested in NEOM. Spend most of your time thinking about it. I'll give listeners a bit of the background. For those that have heard us talk about this project before, in 2017, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman unveiled this audacious vision of a futuristic megacity in the Saudi desert. The idea was powered by this kind of cutting-edge technology running on 100% new renewable energy. There was going to be flying taxis, an artificial moon, just the kicker, a 170 kilometer long linear glass city that was going to rise 500 meters out of the desert. The recent bit of news is, and by the way, this was going to cost $500 billion and somehow happen by 2030 something was the original vision. But this month, an internal audit that was provided to the prince and to other authorities has been kind of been made public, and has pulled back the curtain on what might be the most expensive reality check in economic history. The project's cost has been forecast in this internal audit to balloon from $500 billion to a staggering $8.8 trillion. And the timeline has slipped slightly to possibly 2030 out to 2080. And the project that was called The Line, this 770 kilometer long linear glass city that was there's already under construction, is going to be scaled back just slightly to 2.4 kilometers long. So there's a lot in here around cost overruns and delay and this like ambition for this mega city or project. But in the article and in the audit, there's a whole bunch of other things going on behind the scenes, talking about huge amounts of money paid to consultants. So the amount of things talking about the money spent on consultants versus actual construction. There's a whole bunch of also conversation around like the culture and people leaving. So yeah, where do you want to start? There's a bunch of places to go here.
I mean, let's start with the costs. I mean, who's really surprised? Project this size, what are they, 8 years from inception? You look at the price tag, what they're trying to build. I mean, did anyone ever think that it was going to land in 2030 something for that price tag when you see what's happening, in the middle of the desert? Yeah. So I think if you ask anyone, honestly, they were always expecting that there was going to be some sort of cost blowout, there'd be a time delay. It's pretty much hand in hand with mega projects these days. But when you look at the number, what is that? That's like 16 times the cost and a 50-year blowout. So I think there's something, a conversation around managing expectations when you come out with these sort of these mega projects.
I think I think a lot of people will have seen something about the project, but I don't think the ridiculous scale of like what the idea was fully translates. It's kind of like when you look at a photo of a project versus standing on the ground and feeling like all of the construction work around you, it's hard to like grasp. But the original line vision of a 170 kilometer long city was supposed to have be able to house by 2045 9 million people. Like if you put that in context of cities around the world that hold 9 million people, the scale is pretty crazy. To put that into context, scaling that back from 170 kilometers to 2.4 kilometers, which was like a 90-something% reduction in scope, still means that the line that they are building, this 2.4 kilometers, is expected to have the housing capacity of 3 times Midtown Manhattan in the US.
So is this 2.4 kilometers what's coming out by 2034? Is this the scope they've reduced down to?
Yeah, by 2030 or somewhere 2030, okay. Give or take a decade sort of thing. That reduced scope is still 3 times the housing stock of Midtown Manhattan.
In that span of time.
In that span of time, and with that spend, and that's the housing stock. Then you're in the desert. You need power, water, all the other stuff, around it for people that actually might want to live there, because I guess people might choose to live in the city. So you kind of need all those other services.
It definitely suffers from the understanding the scale of the job. Like all the artist renditions, it's just it's a big glass monument that sits out that you're looking out from a few kilometers, and then there's some sort of internals of it. But when you start to hear about the ambitious, like the things that they're looking to include, you're looking at like a high-speed rail, there was an artificial moon, which you mentioned. There was one I caught when I was reading about, I guess, the culture, which we'll get to. But the Crown Prince is a big Marvel fan, and he apparently engaged one of the artistic directors from Marvel to come over to design a monument, which is going to be a glass skyscraper that they were going to hang from a bridge. Yeah, I don't know if you heard about that, but it's just probably not a probably not necessary, but that's the sort of, that's all the extra stuff on the inside. So yeah,
we've obviously done our fair share of complaining as ex-construction people, hanging up the boots of complaining about architects, but I don't think I've ever had to complain about a Marvel studio artist concept that was not buildable.
Yeah.
One other thing to make a correction on what I did say before, that 2030 target, the 2034 first section is even shorter than the 2.4. I think it's planning to be a half mile long.
Yeah.
The reason for that being urgent is that has the suspended stadium that's like 200 meters in the air, and they're bidding or they've won FIFA World Cup, which is
I think they're hosting it then.
Yeah, which is supposed to be played there. So cue the total shit show of that coming up. There's one other angle with this project, which is was interesting to me, which is that we've obviously done conversations over the last months or year or so about this project. We even interviewed people that have been on the project. We know people that have worked on there, and this common theme kept coming out of like, if you want something to get approved, pitch the most ridiculous, out there, crazy idea that you can, and that's the thing that they like want to encourage or go for, which seems like the complete opposite of what you want to do when you're trying to run a construction project. What was interesting is this idea that Vision 2030 that everyone always talks about with this project, which was a white paper that I'd imagine no one's read, and gets like attached to the thing that they're trying to do. Actually, in that document, talks about a whole bunch of learnings that the country should take forward, or the kingdom should take forward, from their the failures of a prior mega project they had, which was the King Abdullah Financial District. And one of the ideas of that was, or one of the learnings from that was, don't try and build everything at once, because you end up like drawing all your talent in, you end up you have an oversupply or over demand of resources, costs go up, things get delayed. And so this document that is like held up as the reason why we're building this futuristic city thing, the document has no mention of the city in there. It's basically like learnings from things that we stuffed up in the past, and has somehow been like transformed in spirit to this like no room from anything traditional, build the craziest out there thing that we can possibly build. And as a result, like, you kind of think about why that might have happened. And one of the other like interesting wrinkles here inside of this audit, it showed that consultants, specifically consultants like McKinsey, have been paid in the order of $130 million a year for consulting services on this project, which meshes anecdotally with what like we've been hearing behind the scenes of like all this work happening in consultants and advisors, and only a small fraction kind of like really landing in actual construction. Do you have a take on is this like just only going to get worse given that kind of backdrop?
So just to clarify what you said, are you talking about there was a paper that was around the 2030 vision that had all these findings from this previous mega project, or it was a different audit?
All of this work that's happening in Saudi Arabia, whenever you hear it talked about in the news or whatever, you'll always hear like, oh, this is part of Saudi's Vision 2030. They'll like attach the two things. Yep. Like, we're doing all this crazy shit because of our Vision 2030. Vision 2030 is a white paper that was released, I think, in 2016. When you review that document, it has nothing to do with like flying cars, we're going to build a glass city in the desert. None of that. Yeah. It basically is originally focused on driving like government efficiency, like all of the boring shit that a normal government paper would have. Education, we need to build more facilities.
It was steering investment away from oil as well, wasn't it? They were looking at
some diversification. Yeah. But like nothing, very little of that relative to like what was largely in there. Well, there's a big section of like, learnings from when we've built big ambitious things in the past, and it's like, here's all learnings, and it's like almost that set of learnings is taken off as like the to-do list. We must repeat.
Someone missed that disclaimer. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't realize that. It sounds like no one should read those things together now, because you go to the 2030 Vision website and it's just like a grocery list of all these ridiculous projects that you'd be scared to tackle once at a time, and they're tackling like 10 of them. But yeah, going to your, I guess, when you're talking about McKinsey, because I think that was a big part of the headline of the article. It feels like the consultants have been getting dragged through the mud all around the world. I think they're going to be a natural part of the life cycle of these mega projects anyway. The way these government bodies are set up all over the world, that they're not geared to have enough people to sort of deliver the feasibility, that you need to go through the steps like the initial engagement to work out these projects. Having said that, it's quite clear there's something dodgy going on when there's all this anecdotal evidence of McKinsey higher ups being told by execs within the NEOM project or within the Vision 2030 to be changing some of the, I guess, just cooking the books essentially to get the return on investment up, to justify the, internally, yet we're still hitting our projected return on investment targets.
It's like that. There's that like behavior that can sometimes happen in construction projects where you get like a commercial consultant or a quantity surveyor in. That's like this is going to sound like I'm slighting quantity surveyors or whatever, but like they're in as a consultant, and then like the first thing they do is like start an argument with with the subcontractor over some payment or whatever. In which case you need to bring like more of their resources in. So like they have the ability to kind of like generate their own work by causing chaos. It does feel like there's a bit of that going on not just McKinsey, but all the consultants, where it's like, let's pitch more crazy shit. That means we have to go and reevaluate the whole business case. And then when we reevaluate the whole business case, it's like we just keep making more. There's just billable hours coming out the wazoo here.
See, I have a slightly different take when I read it. I think that reading about the culture stuff that was going on there, that there seemed like no one wanted to give out bad news. Like, talked about it, in various places about this fear of, delivering bad news. And I think that being highly amplified, these consultants were in the position like, I'd be shocked if the majority of them weren't quite aware of these things. And there were people in senior positions within the government looking after the project going, no, like we can't show this right now. What can you do? What can you do? And that's where there's probably been some, unethical, unprofessional behavior on what you would expect from someone like McKinsey, but they'd all be guilty of it. But I don't think they're necessarily cooking the books for their own gain.
I know. I get you taking the side of the consultants. That's a bold strategy. I totally know what you mean. Like, I've been on a bunch of projects where there's definitely that culture of like political influence or being careful about the timing and how we present bad news, and you kind of like batch bad news up until some other event where you've got ability to kind of 100%. Like all of that crap. And some of the stories that were in there that you were talking about before we started recording look definitely like there is that culture of like not openness, not sharing of information, which 100% I think drives bad outcomes on projects. You talked about, I think previously on one of the last times you're on the podcast, which was like the best thing is good news. The second best thing is bad news now, as opposed to. So yeah, it'd be good if you could, there's that quote of like what the culture was like, I think.
There was a great article. I think this guy's gone now. I think he was the chief executive for NEOM, but he
hasn't moved to Bali. Just check that before you before you go dropping this story.
So if you're wondering why I think there was probably a culture where people were scared to give bad news. This is a quote in the second paragraph from the CEO. If you don't tell me who was responsible, I'm going to take a gun from under my desk and shoot you.
Yeah. I think I've been on some projects where there's been there's been poor sharing of information and an adversity to bad news, but I don't think I've ever been on a project where I've been directly threatened to be shot. So that's probably another level.
Not a surprise, but yeah, it's fascinating to watch, and it's only 2025. They got a long way to go. So
yep. So the state of play is they're about 50 billion into the spend of originally forecast 500. The project they've got some deadlines they need to hit, especially for World Cup in the 2030s. The forecast cost is currently 8.8 trillion, which is 25 times their annual budget. Look forward to the next, whoever's leaking the internal audit reports, look forward to the next one.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's keep moving then. Second thing we're going to dive into is Stockholm Metro. So this relates to a article that was released and written by our team here in the Offsite podcast and newsletter. For context, beneath the streets of Stockholm, this big engineering project is starting to take place relating to enable the city's expansion. It's one of the most significant infrastructure transport projects since the 1970s there. At the heart of it is a big technological shift for the way that the country builds metros. What I'm referring to is historically in Stockholm, tunnels have been built through a drill and blast method, and we can dive into the detail of how the drill and blast method is used in the background and history of that. But for the first time, they're going to start building this metro with a TBM. The project itself is a $3+ billion equivalent project. The target completion is 2030. It's starting basically now-ish. It includes 20 kilometers of new track and 11 new stations. And one of the craziest bits is there's a station that has a depth of 100 meters. That's blowing my mind in the construction method. And then the second bit is this fundamental switch from drill and blast to TBM. I went pretty deep on TBM. Drill and blast is not a method I've been exposed to for tunnel construction. So I went pretty deep on, just out of interest, into why and the history of that. But yeah, it's a pretty cool project, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I was ridden with envy reading about this project and watching the videos about it. It was kind of like all you read about is I guess terrible mega projects. I can't remember the last time I read about a mega project and I was like, oh, this is great. They've really, that you'll achieve some sort of engineering marvel, but there's a huge cost or time burden associated with it, and it just feels like a lot of pain. Whereas reading about this, it was just amazing engineering feats happening all over the place. It seemed like a very well thought out, well planned project. Super interesting things they were doing all across the network and really tackling a lot of lines and stations at the same time. So yeah, it was super impressive. What did you learn about the? So I did a skin deep. I scratched the surface on the drill and blast. So what did you learn about it compared to the TBM?
They've built most of their previous metro projects through this drill and blast method, which I had no idea that was a common method. Obviously, it relates to the geological conditions in Sweden and around the city of Stockholm. They've got kind of a lot of rock. TBMs are not the biggest fan of rock. They've also got a lot of variable soil conditions. So they've got a lot of water problems and rock and all the stuff that you kind of don't want when you're using a TBM. The thing that has enabled the change is largely a technological shift, which relates to something we talked about in a previous podcast. This kind of variable density or variable condition TBM method, which has more tolerance for the variable conditions. but yeah, we were talking about like the ability and the speed at which they could do. I had no idea that they could move so fast in terms of progress on a drill and blast.
It's all
Yeah,
based on cycles. And like I was reading, they were talking about the efficiencies of drill and blast. And, obviously doing it historically, they'd be some of the best in the game at it. They'd know all about the different rock types that they're drilling in. But
yeah,
yeah, they talked about they were able to change an explosive type, which was increasing cycle times of, setting up and drilling the next section, the next shot and blasting it. So,
the like, I guess there's a couple of factors about this project or about how they typically do metros which enable drill and blast. So first of all, it's like the ground conditions. The second is that in this case, they're probably, if I was to overgeneralize, building a line in anticipation of like population growth. So they're not kind of like tunneling under highly densely populated areas, in which case, again, drill and blast, like we've all heard stories about, in Australia or the UK buying Bose headphones for people or air conditioners because of noise and stuff from a TBM. Going underneath. Once you get a drill and blast crew,
imagine.
it's not going to be, you can imagine. Yeah. And so the progress they could make, I'm trying to find the numbers of the cycle times. 5 to 15 meters per week on drill and blast they were able to make in the most recent metro project in the Blue Line extension. Move it. 15 meters a week is moving, isn't it?
Well, you think so. And then you think about, you don't have all the other issues with trying to like launch a TBM, like the amount of expense to go out and set up your access and where you're going to pull it out the other end, and the expense of the TBM. It's a pretty, I think if the ground conditions made sense, maybe not Australia because, it's a bit sensitive for Australia, but if the ground conditions exist, I'd say the dollars stack up compared to a TBM. With the method you were talking about, is that like the ability they can sense for like water ingress and they can pump grout and like sense for changes in the geology and pump grout in front of it?
Yeah, Carlos was talking about it I think it was maybe the Toulouse Metro was where they also had it, where I think there's a combination of, there's like a reverse pressure, there's like maybe some bentonite injection thing going on.
Right.
I don't want to there'll be some subset of people listening, they're like 100% tunneling people, like you dummy. But for the people that are not them, there's some pressure, like reverse pressure thing going on.
Nice. Reverse pressure. No, I know nothing about it, so I passed the question to you. But no, I thought the drill and blast was awesome, and they had some great videos. I think all mega projects should take a leaf from their PR media team. They had this full sort of like internal doco going on. They were looking at all different stations, showing the drill and blast. I think a lot of people, I think of Oz, and I think, a lot of people would be fascinated to see the progress, because it often just feels like, all right, this job's still going. What's actually happening? It wouldn't hurt to share a bit of that information. So that was really cool.
I think the scope is not insignificant. 20 Ks of track, 11 stations, and the cost is probably there's something to be said for the idea of building the infrastructure before the houses. Because
nice change.
They're building 11 stations and 20K of track for something like the cost of one central London station on a Crossrail type project. And so, having a bit more of the, say, greenfield, rather than letting all the houses and infrastructure get built and then go, how do we thread the needle of a metro line back under this thing? Yeah,
I think they're probably in the minority worldwide to have that, a city of that size to have that opportunity, but it does show you the savings and costs.
We talked previously about like a Riyadh metro where there was a bit of that happening as well. It's certainly, if you take a forward-looking view of things, it makes a ton of sense. But certainly in the minority, because you need all the capital, and there's like a billion other things you'd be also needing to spend the money on.
Yeah.
Before we jump off the topic, any thoughts on 100-meter depth platform?
Yeah, it's pretty deep. I wouldn't want to be taking it every day. It feels like it's pretty hot take.
Spicy take. Oh,
why are they going 100 meters? It feels like, is there a reason? Was there another metro they're threading underneath, or are they just trying to flex do like the reverse of the.
My guess from so let's call it educated guess. Guess feels like I'm just throwing something out there. Based on the data that I saw, I think it's like a combination of the ground conditions rise and fall quite a lot, and so the line is at a depth because it's driven by another part of the metro, and there's only so much gradient you can get on the track.
Yeah.
So I think it's the ground going up and down. Ground goes up and down is the technical answer.
Yeah, I hold my take. That's deep, and I feel bad for everyone who has to take that every day. I don't know if you've taken the one in Parliament Station in Melbourne. I think that's probably like 40 meters, and it feels like it takes 5 minutes to get down. So
I've never taken the Parliament one, but there's a couple of stations in London, like Covent Garden, where there's no escalator; it's just a lift or an elevator,
right.
And there's always next to it the sign that says like stairs to platform. And there's always a sign of like how many stairs it is. And you're always tempted to be like, yeah, I could do 200 steps, no problem. But I think the 100-meter depth, what would that be? Steps, do the math.
Few steps.
A couple of hundred, yeah. Righto, jumping on to topic 3 before we totally run out of time. This is, I don't know, maybe there's not been a huge amount of like opinion pieces written on this. The news is probably a week-ish old, but I'm surprised there isn't more. So for background, after 23 years at the helm, Tui, the founder of Procore, has announced that he'll transition from CEO to executive chairman, which is, I guess, more than, at least in my view, more than just a leadership change. It's a pivotal moment for the construction technology space. Procore, for some context, Procore since his founding of the company grew from what really at the start was like a struggling startup with very little revenue to more than $10 billion public company, serving more than 2 million users across 150 countries. I guess the context of this, if we zoom out, is this transition or change in role comes at a really big critical juncture for construction industry, construction technology, where there's these big waves of AI revolution coming in the mix. There is continued and maybe increasing competition in the space, driven by AI, driven by other companies seeing the success that Procore has had and wanting to have their own version of that in maybe different markets or different verticals. And it raises the question of like the type of CEO that the company will search for, that they will select, what it means for how the company operates, what it means for, I guess, the legacy of that, of TUI and Procore. Maybe to like tee up some discussion, I think there's like 2 sides to it. One could argue that this is a natural evolution. This is a common pathway for founder CEOs after some time of growing the company to kind of want to have a succession plan that injects new energy and blood into the company. And often this role of executive chairman is where they'll end up. For example, I think the same path was followed by like a Jeff Bezos. Similarly, I think the founders of Intercom did a similar thing. There's a long pathway. There's a long tradition of this kind of like move from CEO to executive chairman. It has a bunch of its own risks associated around succession planning. We saw recently over the last few years, like Disney did have a transition of their CEO, Bob Iger, to executive chairman, who then came back in as CEO. So there's a whole story there we can dive into. What would your take be on what this means for the company, and maybe what this succession looks like, on whether it's set up for success or I guess a bumpy couple of years?
Yeah, it'd be I think no one's going to know unless they're in the room, but it'd be interesting to see if the feeling was a natural one, like this has been on the books for a while, or that they felt the threat in the market and realizing that they needed someone else with fresh ideas, with it, being at this juncture where they're at risk that they're going to fall behind. Because I don't think like they have a huge market share, but you see the pace of tech moving now and these AI startups and the ideas that are coming in. There's a lot of people in there with a lot of amazing ideas, and in the matter, I can't remember, like it's been 2 years now, has it, with like ChatGPT sort of establishing, or OpenAI, that they have this model that's producing is it 4?
3, I think.
3 years. So it's not long. And most companies would probably be feeling, I think, in the tech space, if they don't have a clear vision of how AI integrates or excels their product, that they're probably feeling in fear that they're behind. So it'd be interesting to know if they're like, I'd say they're big enough, they've got the right people, that they've got a solid plan in place. But yeah, I'd say this definitely would be contributing to it.
One could make an argument that there's a big technological shift underway through AI, and that the leadership of the company, would look at this is kind of like a recommitment to the next big, like, it'll take years to decade commitment to see this kind of thing through, and that maybe given the 23 years at the helm of the company, he goes, maybe there's someone else better to hit this with the energy kind of that it warrants or deserves. But on the flip side, what you said is totally true, right? It's like, if you're going to fundamentally change a company, if this AI thing is like the future of a whole bunch of their like product stack and whole parts of it's like this horizontal layer that will touch every part of their business. If you take it at its like most evolved, highest potential state of it, and that requires like fundamental change across every part of the business, in how they sell, in the way that the product is architected. There's like teams of people. There's like 150 people in a data and AI team inside of Procore, as an example. There's like lots and lots of people that have to be aligned to this like mission that is going to, like, you're turning the big boat analogy. I think there's another strong argument. It's like, who has the authority to kind of make those changes better than the person that started the company, versus someone new that's going to turn up and try and institute change and might get the whole organization kind of like pushing back at it. The road is littered with many examples of situations where it takes kind of like, let's call it like the founder authority to kind of make the change that, possibly lies ahead. So I think if it was driven by this idea of there's this big change coming and someone with the energy needs to lead the change, that's a risky call, given one could definitely argue that there's no one better than him to lead it. And then it puts a lot of pressure on that person and finding the right person that's going to be able to do that.
Yeah. Can you imagine being in those shoes? Like, you're coming into this to take over from the founder of this incredibly successful company that, in many ways, having the original founder there. I think I read this article. There's like this idea that this person that he called it like the source, but it's just defined there. They have in their head, I guess, the concept and like what's in or out, what, is attached to the brand. And it's like it underpins all strategic decisions for the whole entirety of this company. The shoes of the person to come in to not only, I've got to take this to a new level of revenue. I've got to find some new success in the business and deliver on this strategy. I've also got to help take a company from founder-led to, are they led under me? How does that relationship work with the original founder CEO sitting on the board? Like, it's a lot. It's a lot to sit in that role and big shoes to fill.
Yeah, 100%. There's all of these other people in the company that will have been there for some large part of the journey, and this person is going to kind of have to navigate and somehow harness that like institutional knowledge while trying to make changes to it.
Yeah.
Without the like history and trust and stuff that's built up, which is going to be incredibly difficult. And then there's also that dynamic with that executive chairman role. Yeah. I referenced the idea of Disney before, where they made this transition. The CEO went to executive chairman, and this new CEO got promoted from within, and within like a year or so was fired, and the executive chairman came back in. And there was a lot of reports in the background of like the executive chairman, Bob Iger, not being happy with some of the decisions, not agreeing with some of the approaches, and kind of undermining or kind of micromanaging the new CEO. TUI kind of has to make the decision of like, there's a lot of thought, I'd imagine, going into what's the best way to manage this transition. And you have to be really confident in the decision. And then I think you have to point every part of the organization to that person, follow that vision, and kind of keep empowering that new CEO.
Yeah.
Because the second people feel like they can get a different answer by going to the executive chairman, then like it's all fucking chaos.
I've no doubt they'll do it the right way. It'll be fascinating to see who's the appointment. Like, you'd think the odds are in favor it's going to be someone long-standing within the company, so that it's not such.
They're doing external search.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, different tack. Then it'll be. It is going to be a lot of work to, maybe it is the Disney play. They'll be sitting over and watching what they do. You like 2 years though is not a long time to really play out a strategy, especially if you're looking to, shift to quite a large product or a bunch of products. 2 years to sort of convert that and prove that it's on the right trajectory. Not that that's, the timeline, just using the Disney as an example, but you think you can have to give that a bit more.
I think the Disney thing, the stories around Disney were like, it was kind of cooked pretty early on, because there was just some like, what happens, right? You make this transition, everyone's like buoyed. There's like the first 90-day plan or 100-day plan, and then things kind of get back to somewhat normal. So you've got like this window to make change, and then just shit goes wrong. Like product timelines blow out, revenue targets kind of get hit or missed, and then it's like, does TUI and the CEO have different opinions on it? And then how does TUI kind of like balance the feeling of like, this is my legacy, this is my company, I can see a way to fix this, versus this person has to be empowered to fix it themselves.
Yeah.
And what happened, I think the stories at least point to in the Disney scenario, that the executive chairman got increasingly like involved, which kind of undermines. And then once that starts, it's a one-way door to that person's not going to be there for very long, and it might take 2 years to play out, but it's not going to end well.
It'll be interesting to see, but yeah, once again, massive, incredibly challenging thing to walk into, to take over the boots of the founder CEO for a company like that with that sort of long-standing history. What was it, 22 years?
23 years, I think.
Crazy.
Yeah,
Good
definitely.
Luck.
Well, that is all the time that we have, mate. Thank you very much for stepping in as a very, very, very capable co-host, mate. I hope you had fun.
Yeah, it was good. Thanks for having me. Don't cut my hot take about the 100-meter deep platform. Yeah.
I think there's a good chance you might get the call up for round 2 next week as well. So folks can look forward to having Sam back. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, please think about liking or subscribing. And thank you very much. Have a lovely week.